Okay, so it's 1 o'clock, and I know people are just starting to join us for this webinar today. But I'd like to welcome you here. My name is Lee Stratman. I'm the project manager at the Center for Research and Education on Violence Against Women and Children. And we're really delighted today to bring to you from the Learning Network and the Knowledge Hub, Dr. Charlene Senn, who is presenting the Feminist EAAA Sexual Assault Resistance Program for Young Women in University, how it works and what it does and does not accomplish. We had nearly 700 people register for this webinar, and I think it speaks to the importance and the timeliness of the topic, and of course, Charlene's reputation on this issue and her experience. So as you can see on the opening slide here, just some things to remind you of. Everyone is muted during the webinar, but if you're experiencing any issues, you can type them into the chat box. I see some people are joining in and saying hello, so you can continue to do that. And if you have any questions for Charlene as the presentation goes on, please type them into the Q&A box that's at the bottom of your screen. If you move your mouse, you'll see the menu bar there. And we'll spend a few minutes, about 15 minutes at the end on questions and answers. And at the end of the webinar, there will be a link that will be posted in the chat box. Sarah will post that there for us. And we really appreciate your feedback on the webinars and ask that you complete that evaluation for us. And at the end of that evaluation, it's very brief and simple. It asks you to enter your full name and email address, and a certificate of attendance will be generated and emailed to you. The webinar recording will be posted on our website within the next few days, and once it's posted, an email will be sent to all those who registered for the webinar so that they're aware of it as well. So hopefully that is clear. The instructions are there in front of you. And again, the link to the evaluation, which will generate your certificate of attendance, will come in the chat box at the end of the webinar. Now I'm really pleased to introduce Charlene Senn. Charlene is a social psychologist and professor of psychology and women and gender studies at the University of Windsor. She's been an activist and advocate on issues related to men's violence against women and women's health for many years. Over more than 10 years, Charlene has developed and evaluated a sexual assault resistance education program, the EAAA program for the first-year university women, and she will be telling you more about this in her webinar today. So thank you very much, Charlene. Turn it over to you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm really thrilled to be here today and talking to you. I'm not that familiar with this format, so I'm hoping that this will be useful to you, and that the questions afterwards, that I'll get a little bit of a chance to hear from you as well. I know that all of you are involved in some way in the study of and the practice of dealing with violence against women and children. And so I don't want to presume that we're not already on the same playing field, but I thought it might be useful because some of you are in frontline practice and some are in education and so on, some in policy, that just talk a little bit at the beginning, sort of in a way that would mean that we all know the same things about the field I'm going to be telling you about. So most of my work has been on dealing with situations on campus in the recent years. And despite, I'm sure many of you are frustrated with the media at times when it seems like they're acting like everyone just invented the problem of sexual violence or just found out about it, then in fact we've known about the problem of sexual violence in our communities, but also on campus for at least 30 years. And those rates have not changed. And yet sexual violence education has been going on in our communities and some of our campuses since the 1980s. So it's not been that we haven't taken any action, we've taken lots, but rather the actions that we've taken, particularly on campuses, haven't made much of an impact. So we need to move forward with some different strategies, and we need to choose interventions that work, and that's something that I'm arguing for. We care about sexual violence that's committed against all people. But as you know, sexual assault is a distinctly gendered crime. And using the most conservative estimate, you probably are very familiar with this one, that 1 in 5 young women will have experienced an attempted or completed rape by the time they graduate from university. And of course, the rates of sexual assault are, when you include everything, is much higher. What people often leave out of these statistics is that we actually know this since about 2014, that by the most conservative estimate, 1 in 10 men will have committed a rape, not including attempted rape, by the time they graduate from university. And this is from the relatively new research from Kevin Swartout and colleagues. And I think it's important to reveal the perpetrator data whenever we're talking about statistics. We also know that there's higher than average risk of sexual assault experienced by certain groups on and off campus. One of the reasons campuses are important is because there is a preponderance of young women, and that is a group of women who are at higher risk. We know that women with physical or intellectual disabilities experience much higher risk, as do women experiencing poverty and homelessness. And we also know that Indigenous women and some other groups of women of color, and on campus we're getting recent statistics about international students, not from great research, but we're starting to see that these groups are also at higher risk, as well as higher risk for LGBT plus people. But in all of these circumstances, 98% of all the perpetrators are men. And so from this point forward, I'm going to be using female pronouns for victim survivors and male pronouns for perpetrators. Related to this understanding of all of the groups who are involved and the kinds of prevention that we need to do, one of the things I want to stop and just say is that we know from all kinds of prevention in every area that effective prevention is targeted. That is, that it actually addresses the issues or the knowledge or the gaps in skills that that particular group has. So there is no one size fits all anything in effective prevention, and yet we often forget this. We can do one size fits all for awareness, but as I'm going to talk about in a little bit, that is not actually prevention. So I am contextualizing all of the work that I've been doing on this program you're going to learn more about within this general statement that we know in the field that we actually need comprehensive prevention that is approaching all of the problems in our understanding of sexual violence and all of the audiences. And we need to do it all simultaneously or consecutively or both. And every single choice that we make has both strengths and weaknesses. So there is no one solution, and we are always not dealing with all parts of a problem at the same time. So just briefly going to talk about sort of the 3 main goals that I'm thinking about when I was working on the program. First of all, obviously, we just need to stop perpetration. If we could stop perpetration, then we wouldn't need to go a lot further in many ways. So we need to do that, but you may or may not know that, in fact, effective interventions are very hard to find on this front. There are perhaps 1 or 2 for younger boys. We're talking about grades 6, 7, 7, 8, and they are not widely disseminated. In terms of adult men, most of our work in this area has shown, and this is from many, many researchers over many years, is that most of the programs targeting men actually do not work. Some of them have backlash effects. There's at least one direction that is starting to look promising in the last 5 years, and that's men-only groups combined with bystander and social norms education. I can certainly make links available to you or research available to you if you're interested in that. But generally, we are not in a good place. We don't have broad and sustained implementation for younger men, and so the current reality is still that we have a problem of girls and women being faced by men. Sorry, I just realized that I've got this covering the screen, and that's not going to be a good thing. Let's get rid of that. Sorry about that. So we really need to keep working on this, but we're not there yet. And girls and women are still being faced by men who are willing to commit sexual violence. And we have another goal as well, and many of you are working on this front. We need to change our communities and the broader culture, and we need to do this through individual change and try and make real change in rape culture. But one of the things that we have to note at this point is that while awareness is really good and is a wonderful first step, and it is a base upon which prevention can be built, awareness is not prevention. It does not actually prevent anything on its own. One of the areas that so I'm just going to go back for a minute. One of the areas we've made a lot of positive changes on effective programs is around programs that teach people how to be empowered bystanders. That is, that approaches everyone who attends those as not as potential perpetrators or victims, but as potential allies to survivors and someone who could make a difference. And giving students, if we're talking about campus or citizens, the knowledge and tools they need to help others. The idea is that this could, over many years, make real differences in terms of rape culture, but also, as you can see from this picture, there is the theory that this will eventually surround individual perpetrators by people around them who can detect the early stage things and make it absolutely clear that this is not tolerated in this community. And eventually, over time, you imagine that that would decrease perpetration. But I want to be clear that while we know bystander programs work, when we're talking about their effectiveness, those are effects on bystander attitudes, and the effects on bystander behaviors are there, but they are small. And so far, bystander education is not effective in reducing victimization or perpetration. As I said, it might be in the longer term. Also, we have lots of pop-up programs. We've got a few really great programs. We use the Bringing in the Bystander on our own campus, an adapted Canadian version. But yet, this is still not widespread or sustained. Few campuses are like mine, where we actually have base funding to do this kind of work. And something else that people often neglect to point out is that, in fact, sexual assault is one of the few crimes where there's very unlikely to be bystanders present. So the best research we have says that in only 14 to 17% of sexual assault situations will there be any bystanders present. So bystander intervention is really good at sort of attacking those precursor kinds of situations and the rape culture kinds of things, but would not actually be there for many women. So all of those things are an ongoing and long-term project, and obviously we're also working on policies and processes and good support for survivors, but we really aren't there yet in terms of the prevention. And this means that girls and women are still being faced by men who are willing to commit sexual violence. So I'm arguing that we need another goal as well, and that is to provide girls and women with the information and knowledge they need and the skills to defend themselves. And this is the gap that the Enhanced Assess Acknowledge Act, EAAA Sexual Assault Resistance Program, also known as Flip the Script, is designed to address. And I'll just point out here that I'm clearly not a marketing expert when I came up with that long version of that title. It was, as you'll see on the next slide, it was meant to acknowledge the amazing feminist work that came before by other researchers who had given part of that meaning. Sorry, maybe not on the next slide. So let me tell you a bit about who EAAA, the short form, is for. It focuses on the largest group of students on our campuses who are at risk of being sexually assaulted, and that is self-identified women of all sexual identities and backgrounds and abilities. Other people, other researchers working with me, and many working on their own, are working on developing effective prevention for other groups, but unfortunately none are available yet. So this is where EAAA focuses. So the EAAA is basically a full decade labor of love of myself and my graduate students and others working with me, pulling together basically what I thought is we have all this empirical evidence on what are the obstacles for women when they are faced by coercive men they know. We have theories, both feminist and social psychological. We have best practices that have been, and knowledge is coming out of the work of many of the kinds of organizations that you all are involved with since the 1970s. And so what if I put all of that together, can I make something that actually works for women? The program from its very beginning was designed to be inclusive. The broadest definition of women possible was always there. There was careful attention in both the content and the training of facilitators for inclusion of women with disabilities, lesbians and asexual women, and other women who may not date men for religious or cultural reasons. So all of those things were involved. As well, all of the research that I did and the development and revising, all was done on my campus at the University of Windsor, which is the fourth most diverse city in Canada. Many of you might not know, and then was tested further than that at 3 universities across Canada, so that there have always been diverse graduate students being facilitators, but also students participating and giving feedback so that we could rework the content. So I wanted to talk first about when we're talking about resistance education, what am I talking about? And I put 2 images here. When I'm talking to health researchers or health promotion or nursing and medical staff, I often talk about the first one, which is that resistance education, we can use a medical analogy and say that there is not anything that a person can do in their life that would stop there being bacteria or viruses in their environment. But there are things that they can do to boost their immune system so that when those things are present, they have a better chance of actually fighting them off. And so that is one type of a way of thinking about resistance education. The other is the empowerment, the absolutely saying we will not take it and we will resist. And so that is the other way to think about it. Resistance education is absolutely not this. This is an example of a poster that I ripped down on my own campus. This idea that women are somehow responsible for what happens to them and that blames them for their own behavior. Or the second example, I'm not saying that we should not have walk safes on our campus, but I'm saying that it's also not okay to suggest that women are only safe when they are actually being escorted by others, particularly men, but also by any kind of trained person. So I want to because there's been so many programs and campaigns for women historically that have been so problematic, I wanted to make sure that you understand before I go on about how the program deals with the idea of elevated risk. So we know from research that there are certain behaviors in men and there are certain environments in which risk of sexual assault is elevated. And what EAAA does we need to pass on that information, but the way that EAAA deals with this is quite different from probably most of the kinds of education that you've seen, where it makes explicit that there is no risk that belongs to women or in the situation without the presence of a man who is willing to engage in a coercive way or who is willing to commit sexual violence. A second part that's really important when this is an education program for women is that this is not prescriptive and that the woman herself is always the best judge of what she could or should do in any given situation. And also that when we survive sexual violence, we have successfully resisted it. And so making clear that it is not only about particular behaviors that, that others might see as the resistance, but also surviving and thriving is also resistance. So it doesn't tell women what they should do, and it doesn't hold women responsible for men's behavior. So what it does do, it's designed for the youngest women in university because that is the group that's at highest risk on a university campus. And I'll talk to you a little bit later. In fact, the risk is also high before you get to university, but it was really important to develop the program in a context where women could consent for themselves to be part of the research. And so that's why I chose universities in that way. The program is 12 hours in total, or 4 3-hour sessions, and they're offered either as 4 weeknights, so 4 Wednesday evenings, for example, or 2 weekend days, either 1 whole weekend or say 2 Saturdays. And the program is led in small groups and by 2 women who are expert peers, that is, they're under 30 years of age, so close in age to the young women that are in the groups. So before I tell you about the content, I think it's helpful to sometimes think about a situation so you can hold it in your mind and see how the program might help with this. So I'm going to give you a situation that is fairly common or pulls on common elements. So in this situation, a young woman answers the door one night to a knock, and it's her roommate's boyfriend. And she tells him that her roommate isn't home, but he insists on coming in anyway. Now that feels off to her because she made it clear that she wasn't home, but she's not sure about that. And so he comes in. And he proceeds to act in ways that are making her increasingly uncomfortable. But she starts to think about what her roommate will think about her or about him, and she's worried about that, and so she starts to reason with him. Now, as you know, all of those reactions are completely normal reactions. When danger is coming from a place where you shouldn't have to expect it, that is, from someone who you know and perhaps liked, and in a situation that should be expected to be safe, that is your own home, in this case your apartment. But those totally normal reactions delay our acknowledgement of danger and therefore our action. And the longer a situation goes on, the more dangerous it is to us. So this is how a resistance program works. And I point out first that the whole program is framed within a positive sexuality context, and I'll come back to that. But the idea of a resistance program is to decrease the time it takes for a woman to identify a behavior or a situation as dangerous to her, reducing the emotional obstacles to seeing that danger in the behavior of acquaintances of known men, which is a particularly difficult thing, and also to detect danger in about and to undermine the idea that her behavior is somehow under scrutiny and will be seen as inappropriate. And it maximizes the use of what we know are the most effective defensive strategies. So it's designed to increase women's ability to get out of a situation with the least harm possible without elevating her fear or restricting her in any way. So now I'll take you through the bare bones of the units to show you how the program would help a first-year women student with the scenario I outlined a few minutes ago. So one of the things that we experience across basically all of the dangers in our lives is there's a statistical reality, but there's also our normal human tendency to think that we're not at risk for things like HIV or accidents or crimes, but that other people who are like us are. And that's common to all of those situations. Now, obviously, if we don't think that acquaintance sexual assault could happen to us, then this is another obstacle for detecting danger. But also, if I'm going to be a student who's going to participate in a 12-hour program talking about sexual assault, I also need to feel that this is personally relevant to me. And so I need to, through this program, the program needs to make it clear that there is personal relevance and it is possible. And the first unit, Assess, provides activities that make this really clear. I wanted to also point out that I am giving you only a nutshell version for each unit, which is actually 3 hours. So I'd be happy to answer questions about it, but please know that this is the short form. So other things that the Assess unit does is that most women have been socialized to fear stranger rape, most of us, and to engage in a myriad of precautionary behaviors such as not walking alone, checking the back seats of our cars, doing all of these things that actually restrict our quality of life without providing any protection at all from the most common circumstances for sexual assault. So for example, on campus, over 90% of all of the assaults are committed by acquaintances. So we need to reorient to the real dangers. And so using empirically derived risks and actually conveying those to the young women is one of the things that the Assess unit does. So to give you an example, we know from the research that isolation increases perpetrators' advantages. And without any education or training, most women are actually, this is the scenario that they would be most likely to come up with, that underground parking lot. But the more common situation of isolation is one like this, where actually the isolation would be from being in a crowded environment, but now moving to an area where there aren't so many people present, and perhaps where the music outside the door is actually creating a different kind of sound isolation. There are, of course, other situational danger cues. On the presence of alcohol, I'll just make clear that there is so much focus on women's drinking, but in fact, the research shows that there is a risk, elevated risk of sexual assault, whether women are drinking, whether men are drinking, or whether neither are drinking and there is drinking in the environment, or all of them. And the program, the EAAA program, deals with that appropriately. There are also a number of danger cues in men's behaviors, or otherwise known as red flags, that we also know are signs that the risk of that man being sexually coercive is higher. So things like sexual entitlement. Here's an example where he asks her a question about her major and then sexualizes it in a way that makes the pit of your stomach sort of go, oh, yuck. And many of these danger cues are things that, in fact, women feel ugh about, or you sort of feel off about, but they don't. So the Assess is about saying, and actually you're right about those feelings. The research supports that. And particularly important here is the focus on persistence, and that is someone who persists in going after what they want, even in a non-sexual situation, despite your saying that's not what you want. That is indeed a danger cue. So moving to acknowledge, the second unit, we know from research that, in fact, traditional gender socialization and other types of goals that have been associated with gender socialization for women can actually be serious obstacles to resistance. So the Acknowledge unit deals with this reality. So here we're really trying to overcome those emotional barriers that might be related to our traditional views of ourselves as women, or what other people expect of us, and really reinforcing that women can trust themselves in situations. So Acknowledge makes really explicit that this idea that we have to be nice at all costs actually can be injurious to us when we are in danger. And that while the desire not to hurt others is really admirable in a situation where we are, again, in danger, that is not serving us. Also unpacking and this idea that women need, if they're heterosexual, need a male partner can also be an obstacle to our actions in resisting and detecting early risks to us. And so the Acknowledge unit provides a context for women to explore these for themselves. So basically a huge pile of barriers are discussed, but women are identifying for themselves which of these would be theirs. The Acknowledge unit also explicitly debunks what is known in the research as the miscommunication hypothesis, which slows our response and detection. And many of you will know this, you will have recognized this in your own work. And this is the idea that somehow men just don't understand and they can't read the communication, or that women are just not being clear enough. But in fact, the research shows that both men and women are completely capable of reading verbal and quite subtle nonverbal indications of disinterest, that there is no gender deficit in this. And that in fact, women are clear, and that in the majority of situations, they've made clear verbal indications they are not interested, and men persisted anyway. The Acknowledge unit also deals with the reality, again, many of you who are working frontline know about, which is that typical perpetrator responses, the kinds of things they say in response to women's refusals, are actually very confusing and can cause women to doubt themselves. And so the Acknowledge unit makes visible that and gives women practice, sort of experiencing those and then counteracting them. And so it exposes all of those realities and then reinforces that women's own judgment and knowledge is the best thing for them to trust as they move forward. The third unit, ACT, is the one that many young women come in most excited about. And this unit is all about acting, that is both being able to assert your needs clearly, which most women have going on and have covered already, but then to follow that up with physical and verbal self-defense if you're not listened to. Before we teach physical self-defense, and I would point out that this is the actual physical self-defense is based on Wendo Women's Self-Defense, which I hope that you know about, because it's the oldest, 40 years old and strong in feminist self-defense in Canada, still a collective. So that is what the 2 hours is based on. And all of the self-defense that's taught is focused on acquaintance situations, because we know that doing general self-defense training that presumes that you won't like the person or won't know them or won't need to see them tomorrow is not useful at all, or not likely to be useful in most situations. So the other thing that ACT does before the teaching of self-defense is to undermine the kinds of myths that are promulgated in society that can interfere with our self-defense or our action. So one of them that young women often come in with is the idea that women who fight are more likely to be injured or killed. And this is in fact a myth, and has been put forward by some people as to have been totally debunked. Any of the research that supported that didn't look at what violence came first. In other words, women are more likely to fight back against higher levels of perpetrator violence. And so injuries were in fact already, they had already experienced them. And in fact, when we look at which came first, a woman who fights back is at the same risk of injury as a woman who does not. The other myth that we debunk is this idea that women cannot be effective against larger and stronger men. In fact, the research shows that even in stranger situations, that most women who do resist are able to stop or reduce the severity of the attack. In fact, the more strategies a woman uses, the higher the likelihood that she'll be able to escape or decrease her injuries. So that is something that ACT makes clear. So what actually works? What is put forward to the young women? Because what do we know from research? From the best research available, we actually know that any type of forceful verbal resistance, really using your voice in a powerful way, is as effective as many physical activities, both against strangers and as acquaintances. That forceful physical resistance is extremely effective, again, and that leaving or running away, if that can be done at that stage, is also, of course, very effective. And women use these strategies regularly against strangers. But in fact, these are the strategies women are least likely to employ against men they know without this kind of resistance training. So I'd like you to think again about that situation that I described earlier, and think about how a young woman who has been through the EAAA program would sort of think about what was happening and how it might empower her. So, for example, in assess, she would know that that sense that she had early on, that when he insisted on coming in, that something was off. In fact, persistence, he was persisting, and that she is very likely to be right about that. His persistence in the face of her actions are actually a warning sign. She would also know that the isolation of her own apartment, even when her roommate is not home, also heightens the risk because it increases perpetrator advantages. And the acknowledge unit would help her to see that she's probably right, something is off, and she's right, she has absolute right to get mad and to resist. And she would know that if the first strategy she tried didn't work, that she can escalate, and that she should continue to try new strategies until she is safe. One of the things she would consider because of the program is actually leaving her own apartment as a strategy, which is something that most of us do not think of unless we've actually that possibility has been put forward to us. So where does sexuality education fit in? I said that, that this is all within a positive sexuality framework. Well, for those situations where a romantic or sexual relationship is desired or ongoing, EAAA does put women's own sexual desires and values at the center of the discussion. And so the fourth unit is actually all about that. And so it's designed to assist with the other common sexual assault situation of sexual assault by male intimates, but it also works for all women to basically explore their own desires. And the theory is that, first of all, I wanted the program not to be just about refusal, but also emancipatory sex education that most of us lack, even as adults. We need to sort of a space to figure out what our own desires and values are, and that can give us the knowledge and confidence then to detect risk earlier as well. So the idea is, and my early research showed, that adding this emancipatory sex education component actually sped up the detection of danger, particularly for heterosexual women. So what is the program? What is this unit? It's based on the Our Whole Lives Sexuality Education unit, because I did not, program, because I did not want to reinvent the wheel where there were high quality sex education programs already around. These are the issues that I decided fit best with the other parts of the program, so you can take a brief look at these. for straight women, often expanding what is sex and sort of into all the full range of orgasmic sexual activities, discussion of masturbation as a place where women can figure out their own sexual desires, and figuring out one's own personal preferences about for engaging in sexual activity, but also skills in negotiating sex you do want, as well as safer sex activities as well. So I'm going to very quickly show you a video that was created by the New England Journal of Medicine editors. They chose the article based on our first study, our randomized control trial, for what they call a quick take. And what this is basically, sorry, I'm just going to pause it for a minute. They said that medical students don't have time to read, which makes me wonder sometimes. But in the process, they made this weird little video that summarizes the findings of the research. So I'm just going to show it quickly to you.
This is Jeffrey Drayson for the New England Journal of Medicine. College should be a time for learning, personal growth, new friendships, freedom, and fun. For too many young women, however, attending university means confronting the risk of sexual assault. We know this problem is real, yet we've lacked effective interventions to address it. A study of a novel intervention published in the journal offers new insights into this troubling issue. Investigators randomized 900 first-year female students.
Sorry to interrupt, Charlene. Do you mind pausing it for just a second? Because it's not showing the video, only the audio.
Oh, you're kidding. Okay. So, do you have any, the video is showing on my screen. Do you have a possible?
Because it's, the PowerPoint is showing now through the share your screen.
Okay.
But not the video itself, yeah.
Okay. I'm not sure what to do about that. Let me see. I've got an idea. Hold on one second. Sorry. This is clearly something that in the technical, can you see my web browser right now?
Nope, still only your slides.
Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to close out the slides. Oh, I know. Sorry. Let me go back. I have an idea. One moment. All right. Now I'm going to. Can you see my web browser now?
Yes.
Okay. Do you want me to start it over?
Yes, please. And if you can just please click on full screen.
Yes, I will. It was, yes, yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm very sorry to people.
This is Jeffrey Drayson for the New England Journal of Medicine. College should be a time for learning, personal growth, new friendships, freedom, and fun. For too many young women, however, attending university means confronting the risk of sexual assault. We know this problem is real, yet we've lacked effective interventions to address it. A study of a novel intervention published in the journal offers new insights into this troubling issue. Investigators randomized 900 first-year female students at 3 Canadian universities to either usual practice, meaning offering women informational brochures and an opportunity to ask questions, or to a 12-hour program that educated participants about assessing risks and overcoming emotional barriers to acknowledging dangers, as well as teaching verbal and physical self-defense. Follow-up surveys showed that the program worked. The one-year risk of completed rape was 9.8% in the control group, as compared with 5.2% in the intervention arm. The one-year risk of attempted rape was also significantly reduced from 9.3% in the control group to 3.4% in the intervention arm. Only 22 women would need to take the program to prevent one additional rape from occurring within 1 year. Of course, effective programs that educate and engage men are also needed. However, these data show the promise of a program that empowers women, adding important insights to inform the critical effort to make university campuses safe for all students.
All right, can everybody see my PowerPoint slides again?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, very good. The other article that you can see on this PowerPoint slide is the second article that we published showing that the effects for sexual assault last for at least 24 months, and also publishing the next findings I'm going to summarize for you. One thing I do want to point out from that, from the graph that you saw in that video, is that the control group, women in the control group, in the 12 months after they were enrolled in the study, so they were enrolled in the study in either the fall or winter of their first year, and you probably noticed that that was a 9.8% completed rape rate. So extremely high for that first year and a bit of university. So the other program effects, obviously, it's the most important one really is the sexual assault effects. Are we able to make a difference there? But of course, getting there is, there's other important things too. How does it make women feel and what do they know? So that first thing, that overcoming the optimism bias that I said was really important, this idea that it couldn't happen to me. In fact, the program does increase women's estimation that it could happen to them, and that lasts for full 2 years. But I want to point out that this is not a high fear position. This is more, it couldn't happen to me, being moved to the middle of what we consider the middle of the scale. It could, or it's possible, that sort of position. I'm confident that I could defend myself against an acquaintance if necessary. That increased and stayed high. This is otherwise known as self-defense, self-efficacy. And is it really, really important to our ability, self-efficacy is important to our ability to take actions on our own behalf. If we believe we can, then we're more likely to be able to. Do I know about what the most effective methods of self-defense are, and am I more willing to use them? And all of these were increased at the end of 1 year and continued for 2 years. Now, I'm sure for many of you, like me, who are very concerned about programs for women giving bad messages about who is responsible for sexual assault, as I said in those first few slides, EAAA is very clear about this and puts 100% of the responsibility on perpetrators. But I wanted to test and make sure that the program was lowering those views. And in fact, women's belief in rape myths, and particularly in woman-blaming kinds of explanations for rape, was decreased from their already low levels to even lower. And some people have worried that if we are giving education on what the most effective methods of self-defense are, that a woman who is sexually assaulted afterwards might hold herself more responsible, as if she should have done something. Now, as I said in those early slides, the program is very clear that a woman herself is the best judge. And so I was pretty sure this would not be the case, but I measured it just in case. And in fact, women who did experience rape after they had been in the program blamed themselves less than women who had not had the program. So which women does EAAA work for? Sometimes people have presumed that it might not work for all women. But for every subgroup where we were able to test differences, so we had a large enough group, so we were able to show that it does. So it works as well for white women and for racialized women. It works well for heterosexual, lesbian, and bisexual women. And counter to some people's belief that many of you who work in this field know this is the case, and in fact, the risk of sexual violence by men was higher for lesbians and bisexual women, and the participation in the program took this almost down to 0. Women who have experienced prior sexual victimization, I'm going to talk about that in a minute, so survivors who are in the program and women who have not experienced those things, the program works for all of those groups. So what is the experience like for survivors who attend the EAAA program? Other programs that have been developed for women, some of them have been called risk reduction programs. I don't like that name at all, but those have not been effective for women who are survivors already. EAAA is, as I said. Something else you might want to know is that almost all of the survivors who enrolled in the program completed it. There was a handful of women out of the about 450 who were randomly assigned to get the program in our randomized control trial, who decided in the first unit that it was still too fresh for them, that they thought they were going to be fine talking about sexual assault for all these hours, but they weren't. But at least half of those women actually enrolled the second semester and then completed it. Survivors have told us in their evaluations and anecdotally that through personal emails to me or to the other members of the team or in conversation with the facilitators that they had extremely positive experiences and that it was very realistic. Now, why is this the case? Well, I think it is because the whole program is basically soaked in a feminist anti-victim blaming framework, and the empowerment philosophy helps to keep all survivors in the room. The scripts for facilitators are trauma-informed from the beginning and presume survivors are in the room, whereas many education efforts that I've seen actually don't. They it's like a surprise later. So from the very beginning, I knew that we needed to make sure that everything worked for all women. The facilitators are very well trained, and they are trained to deal with signs of distress in ways that don't single out women and that make sure that everyone in the group is safe to continue. Sometimes survivors give us specific feedback about a specific element. So here's one I received very recently where she says, in the EAAA program, one thing that was highlighted was that survival is success. This is something that will stick with me. It meant a lot to hear that and altered my perspective on what I've been through. This was a young woman who said that she'd done a lot of therapy, but that she still found herself stuck in a couple of places and that EAAA helped for this reason. Another survivor gave a more sort of full program response. She emailed me and wrote me a long email, but she started it by saying, "Thank you for giving me my freedom back." She explained that she had experienced rape in high school and that she had increasingly restricted her activities and her world that continued in university. And so when she was part of our study, she was randomized to get the program, and that it opened the world back up for her. So I want to sort of round out our webinar today by talking about the use of the program, and so that you have a sense of sort of how people decide to use it and where it is being used and so on. EAAA is now the only sexual violence program, education program that is available that actually reduces the sexual violence that women students experience. None of the others do this. It is effective because it is intensive, and I'm sure some of you are thinking about this, particularly people who are from universities, and I know there are a few universities enrolled. The length of it and the format means, the small group format means it's not cheap or simple to implement, just as many of your frontline services are also. They have to be in a particular format to make them effective. I'm currently on the research side conducting a study that is enrolling up to 9 Canadian universities, and we do have 5 enrolled right now, so there is room this year for a few more campuses, and we're particularly interested in outside of Ontario. This research is funded by the Canadian Institutes of Health Research. So that's going on. But further than that, it became clear to me once all the media coverage of the New England Journal of Medicine article came out, and I was inundated with requests for the program, and I realized I really hadn't thought that through of how I would get this in the hands of other people once it was proven to be effective. And so I created a nonprofit in January of 2016, and I have a strong commitment to a not-for-profit model and to keeping this free to women students. And obviously that is conflict with some of the American companies who have been approaching me over the many years, but I'm committed to this and to making it accessible. So the current way that this is sort of rolled out is that the SARE Center, Sexual Assault Resistance Education Center, uses train the trainer workshops that I designed a workshop so that universities could send staff, and those staff could be trained as campus trainers who then could go back to their campus and hire and train and supervise facilitators, usually graduate students, on their own campuses and use the program themselves. The SARE Center, we also connect universities with Wendo Women's Self-Defense with the best instructors who help them to train the facilitators so that they can deliver the self-defense components. As you might have wondered about, EAAA is also one of those rare programs where the physical self-defense is not taught by people who are certified self-defense instructors. It's taught by regular women who are trained to do all of the content. And to do this, we have the collaboration with Wendo Self-Defense. We also strongly recommend that universities build relationships with their local sexual assault crisis centers if they don't already have that, and as many of you will know, that is more or less or absent in some situations. And we really encourage that so that the universities have community expertise and support for their work and for student and facilitator referrals if necessary. So the successes we've had in implementation have been many. The number of universities and colleges that are using EAAA is increasing all the time, and you can see the countries that it's currently in. My dream was also that the feminist community organizations would sometimes be leading the implementation on campuses. And in the first couple of years, that was not looking very promising, as universities were telling me that they'd rather do it themselves. But in the last year, there has been more for this. So, for example, in the US, recently trained Planned Parenthood staff in one area, and the Ontario Coalition of Rape Crisis Centers now has a number of campus trainers available to universities. The satisfaction with our Train the Trainer workshop is actually very, very high. It's an intensive process, but it's been good. We've been doing that now. We've had 7 Train the Trainer, I think it's 7. At least 6. Sorry, I'm having trouble with that. I didn't think about that. We also are getting very positive reviews by students in all the countries that it's being implemented in. And just like in our trial, we had very high rates of attendance for all 4 units, with almost 80% of young women completing at least 3 or 4 units, which is very high. And so people wondered, because it's so long, what will happen? But of course, it is also fun and really engaging. So we get that everywhere. And the other thing that we're seeing, we never did research on this, although we were beginning to look at this a little bit more, but that doing the facilitation actually changes facilitators who sometimes were engaged in sexual assault activism or advocacy before, but many are after they've done this work. There are also obstacles to implementation, as you might imagine, and I'm sure you are thinking of a few yourself as we're going through. One of them is that most universities still don't have very many resources available, even to the offices that are supposed to be having to do all of the education and prevention work, or their resources are not directed to prevention. And so things like staff being so overcommitted that they don't have the time to train and supervise facilitators has been an issue in some cases, or the financial resources to actually pay student facilitators. And while volunteer facilitators are used for many short programs, particularly bystander programs or student-led groups, this is not advisable, I don't think, for an in-depth program like EAAA, because the training is so intensive and the requirements are very high. And so you really need people who are going to be staying across a longer period if possible. Also, there's the obstacles of, well, we're already doing this. We already have self-defense. And just, if you didn't know this already, RAD is almost entirely based on strangers and is not focused on violence against women particularly. So that's where I'd say we need comprehensive. Sometimes some of the universities in the first year or so are having some problems with recruitment. They haven't worked that out yet. And as I'm sure is true of some of you, that there are pockets of feminist concern on some campuses related mainly to an understanding that any program for women is necessarily victim blaming or holding women responsible for sexual assault. And I hope I've been able to show you how I don't think that is true in this case, and that I think we're missing something if we don't pass on these kinds of knowledge and skills. But there are a number of areas, and I'm realizing I've got about 2 minutes left, so I'm going to quite quickly say this. One of my areas that I would really like to work on is to actually boost the program's effects for survivors. And I'm just going to quickly show you this and then move on, but you can certainly ask me questions about it if you'd like. So if I break down those graphs you saw in that little video and actually look at only the women who have never experienced rape before they come into the study, you'll see that the control group has about a 6% rather than that 10% average in 1 year, and that the program takes that down to about just under 2%. So that's a substantial difference. But all of you who work with survivors also know that re-victimization is a serious problem. And if we look at the experience for women who have already experienced rape before they come to university, their 1 year rate is actually 23%, which is, and this is just for completed rape, oral, vaginal, or anal rape. And so the program works and really diminishes the number of experiences that women have, but you can see that this is still way too high. And so I'm really interested in moving forward, working with those who work with survivors to boost, to have supplementary programs or to boost the effects for women. I'm interested in, for example, there weren't, I did not ask whether, about gender identity in the early research because it was self-identification, but I am interested in this question. And we are doing adaptations, including, I'm sure some of you are wondering about, for younger girls. So these are a list of adaptations that are underway. And this is my summary of what we don't know, something like EAAA can't do, or what we don't know yet. We don't know what the effects of having EAAA on campus are, as, for example, perpetrators are confronted by women who are resisting in these ways. We also don't know, EAAA cannot do everything, and so we need the complementary approaches on campus, including all of the other things you do. And we don't know, for example, beyond the actual self-defense risk of being arrested, women, as you know, women of color, particularly Black women and Indigenous women, are more likely to be arrested when they defend themselves. That knowledge is built into the program, but we don't know if there are additional obstacles for other women that need to be, as the research comes out, put into the adaptation. So I'm leaving you with this reminder of what resistance is. And sorry for going a minute over there. Annalie?
Hi, Charlene. How are you?
Oh, good, thank you.
Good. I think I'm supposed to oh. Can you see me?
Just a second. Let me open you up again here.
I don't see me either. So anyway.
Your video isn't on, I don't think.
No, okay. How do I start video? There we go. Hopefully that will come to work. Thank you very much for that presentation. It was very interesting and inspiring. I've been following your program for quite some time, and it's exciting to see results of the research. They always take a long time to come out, and as you know, and so you must be feeling very gratified to be able to share those results as you're progressing now. We have had a lot of questions about the program. I have to just let people know that the PowerPoint itself is not available, but the recording is available, and it will be available in the coming days. You'll get a link to it in an email. So stay tuned for that, but the PowerPoint itself will not be available. And Charlene is definitely accessible if you have some questions for her about some of these things afterwards. But some of the questions that came up today that were interesting to me is although people are really thrilled about your program, Charlene, they're interested in modifications. And so some of the questions regarding modification might be implementing it is it available in French? Have you tested it in high schools? What about in with newcomers or in Indigenous communities? And look at that. You're going to be able to answer this quite nicely.
So the bottom line is none of those have been fully tested yet. And of course, if you notice the length, I actually started this work in 2003 and got the funding for the first to develop the program in 2005. And then in the process of piloting and revising and all of those things along for several years. So I did not have a full, oh here, sorry, should I minimize you again? There, so people can see. And so it takes a long time to make sure that something works, that it's not harmful, all of those things. So I can now say that in terms of French, within 5 years, there will be a full a version that is available and it's suitable for Francophone contexts. That team is being led by Elizabeth Dagnon at the University of Montreal, and we've been applying. We have some CIHR bridging funding right now, and we're applying again for more funding, and they're working on a full, basically doing a scan, doing focus groups within I think 7 Quebec universities and Moncton, I think, and also Moncton, and to really see what adaptations need to be made, partially because of the difference in age because of CEGEP, but also trying to figure out how it needs to be adapted. The adaptation that's further along is for younger girls in high school. So first of all, I did do some pilot testing in high school along the way. I didn't have funding, so it was small, but I got permission not from the public school board, but from the Catholic school board. So they did not allow me to do the sexuality unit. You will be so surprised to know. But they did allow me to do the other 3 units without any modifications for girls 16 and older in high school. And the waiting lists were longer than the size of the groups. In many cases, even we were doing it really small. I have a postdoctoral fellow who was just hired April 1st, Dr. Sarah Cran. You can see her name there. And she is now doing a fully rigorous adaptation, including we're going to remake the videos, all of those things for younger girls, and seeing if we can actually go down to as young as 14. We might need 2 different versions for 14, 15-year-olds and older. So that's going further. And so you can see that there's some, in terms of moving into specific contexts, so like newcomers, because the program is designed right now for university students, international students and newcomers who are enrolled in university have always been part of the program. So there's no reason to suspect, given all of our research, that the program would not work for them, although I did not ask about citizenship, so I'm not able to partition that out. But it would need substantial adaptation for community contexts. And I would obviously need people to lead those.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that. Now, thinking about high school students, so there's a question here. Somebody's very concerned about the backlash against healthy sexual education that we're seeing in Ontario right now, and how do we continue this needed work in the face of such backlash?
Yeah, I'm as worried about that as you are and trying to change it. At the same time, that's one of the reasons why I thought it was so critical to include a full sexuality unit in EAAA. And I would suggest that it might be possible to enhance it's already the enhanced program, to do that even further to compensate in areas. I mean, we need to do all the fighting to get that reversed. But also, if we, in the meantime, I think that providing more sex education that is fully inclusive and informed by research and so on is really critical.
Okay. Somebody else wondered about the best advice to give a young girl who's experiencing unwanted sexual advances and to keep her safe for the future.
Yeah, it's always hard to know given the situation. And so one of the things I would say is that you saw those incredible reductions in the program in the sexual assault outcomes for attempted rape, that they were like nearly 2/3 reduction. And I believe that, and you think, well, how can women decrease attempted rape, right? That doesn't even seem possible because most people are focused on the physical self-defense. So what I would say about that is I really believe that that is the part of the program that is about things like risk factors and so on. But more than that is saying, trust yourself when you feel like something's wrong and get out of there. Use your friends as allies, right? All of those things. Trust yourself. If you think something's wrong, it probably is, and go with that. And that early sort of step, I think, is why we get those huge reductions. And then the next thing is to say that you are worth defending loudly, and that really, sort of making a big we resist, right? Both in our with our voices, that works, and it works better than the alternative, than being polite or those things, which we know there's all kinds of reasons we do those things. But also, so you have the right to defend yourself, and you have the right to get mad, because anger can actually give us access to adrenaline, which can reduce the likelihood we'll freeze in those situations. Okay. And so that's part of it.
Thank you. Okay, that's really great. You mentioned the Our Whole Lives curriculum. Can you expand on that a little bit? What is that?
Sure. So this was something that was pointed out to me by a former graduate student when she was working on her dissertation on emancipatory sex ed. She found this Our Whole Lives sexuality curriculum, and it's actually connected. It's put out by the Unitarian Universalist Church. Now, I'm an atheist, so I was like, a church-based sex ed, but actually any of you who know better than I did that the Unitarian Universalist Church is actually a social justice church. It was one of the first to basically house LGBT services and so on. And they have spent a lot of time and money over many years to get experts to develop. They have right from kindergarten all the way through to adult sex education curriculum. And you can just go on their website. If you search Our Whole Lives, you will find it, and then you can just buy their little manuals, and they have like one for grade 10 to 12, one for young adults, and so on, and then you can use their activities. And of course, I chose the ones I thought fit best, and I modified them slightly with permission from them, but it's used in many school boards. For example, in Oregon, they're used all the way through their curriculum.
Okay, so is there, so I guess people are wondering how they can bring it to their campus.
Yes. All right. So, so what I would suggest is that people go to the SARE Center website, because it has information on, it has frequently asked questions, although I want to say that I've been trying to revise those over the last little while, and they're not as good as they should be, or not as up to date. But if you go to that site, you'll see more about like when our campus trainer trainings are, and so on. There's also an infographic on that site that your center has helped us to produce, that is like a double-sided color. Really, it captures everything, and it basically says, give this to your administrators, give this to the people who who might know, so they find out more about it. And it also has the links to the research on it. So they can download that from the SARE Center website, and then they can contact us if they want us to, if they want to ask more questions about how you bring it to your campus, and so on.
Okay. I think that that might be all the time we have today. We have had a ton of other questions and comments, and I'm sorry that we couldn't get to them all, but some very good, interesting comments. And I'm sure that if you wanted more information, to please follow up with Charlene. You can reach her at the email or check out the SARE Center, and you'll get some more information there. Sarah has kindly posted the evaluation link in the webinar chat box. And so if you if you're interested, please complete that evaluation. We appreciate the feedback on the webinars and looking for ideas on new topics to be addressed. So please fill that out. And as we mentioned earlier, once you've completed that evaluation, it will send you to a link to print out a certificate of attendance. So having said all that, I'd like to thank you very much, Charlene, for taking the time to provide this webinar today. It was very, very informative. It's an exciting program, and hopefully you're going to be able to spread it out to a number of audiences and make the Enhanced Assess, Acknowledge, Act program something that every young woman has a chance to experience.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
Thank you.